The Subaru STI is back on the channel. I bought this thing off of Copart pretty cheap because it had a spun bearing. I've already put 500 miles on this vehicle since the engine rebuild, and in this episode, we are going to be making 1,000 horsepower. And I lied, I'm just kidding. It's been 200 miles on this current oil change, and we have about a quart of coolant in the oil. That is a very, very serious engine problem. So in this episode, we are going to be diagnosing the problem and probably just fixing it all in one episode. I'm hoping, I'm praying that it's a bad head gasket. It's going to be the cheapest fix. It's going to be the quickest fix because I think the other likely options is a cracked block or a cracked head. But there are some simple things that we can do to diagnose it, starting with the IAG AOS in the corner here. I want to assure you guys before I get started that I installed the two coolant hoses on this correctly. The two coolant hoses go on the bottom left side of the IAG AOS, right where I'm pointing with my fingers, and one of them goes to the top of the coolant expansion tank. The other one we're not going to be able to see very well, but it goes to the top coolant feed on the turbo. I'm 99% sure that that's not the issue. The other thing it could be is our turbo housing is cracked, letting coolant and oil mix in the turbo. It's important to know that none of the seals inside of the turbo separate coolant and oil. It could only be a crack in the housing letting those two mix, which if you guys remember, I did have to air hammer the exhaust housing off for like 2 hours. So maybe that cracked it, but I'm not really sure how we're going to test that. What I do know we can do is test our head gasket with a fluid tester. We can also do a lot of extra testing with a cylinder leak down tester. We can test the head gasket, we can test the valves, we can test the piston rings, and we can test for cracks in the cylinder walls as well. And honestly, my personal guess is that we have a crack somewhere. I really hope it's the head gasket. That would be super cool, but I just have a bad feeling that we have a crack. We're going to test the coolant for exhaust gas, which is kind of redundant because the cylinder leak down test could do the same test. But the reason why I'm doing both is because I need to get the engine up to temp anyway to do the cylinder leak down test. So while it's running, I might as well just do the fluid test for fun anyway. Now the painful part, we need to do the cylinder leak down test when it's warm, which means we have to run the engine. If I was a good person, I would probably change the oil so I'm not lubricating the bearings with coolant while I'm warming it up, but we're gonna send it. So as you can see, it sounds pretty healthy. Also, I'm noticing we do have a little bit of smoke coming out of the exhaust, but it is pretty cold out. So maybe we just do have a head gasket that's bad. Another thing you'll notice is that I have the coolant cap off the expansion tank. That way we're not building pressure in the cooling system. And once we're up to temp, I don't have to release all that pressure, sending coolant everywhere. So right now we're just going to be patiently waiting for our coolant system to get up to temperature, and then we can do the tests that we need to do. Okay, so we are getting up to running temperature. So I got my head gasket fluid tester all set up, ready to go. We're just going to seal it on the expansion tank here, and then for 1 minute, we're going to squeeze this top valve here, and if this fluid turns colors, we have exhaust gas in our cooling system, meaning we have a bad head gasket. And 1 minute later of squeezing, we have blue fluid, meaning at least our head gasket is not broken and getting exhaust gases into our coolant. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that our head gasket isn't bad. It could just be bad in another spot. Our leak down test is probably going to tell us the issue better than that fluid tester is. So next up, we're going to do our cylinder leak down test. The cylinder leak down test is very, very similar to a compression test. We need to get our spark plugs out, and then we're going to use our air compressor to pressurize our cylinders, and we'll see how much pressure we're putting in versus how much pressure is coming out. And that pressure difference is going to tell us whether we have a very bad leak somewhere. Another thing we can do with that pressurized air is if we do have a bad leak, we can see where the air is going. So if we had bad piston rings, our air would be going into our oil, and you could take out your oil dipstick and hear air coming out. If you had a bad intake valve, you could hear the air going through your PCV system. If you had a bad exhaust valve, you could hear that air escaping out your exhaust. And if you had, let's say, a bad head gasket or a cracked block, you would hear that air escaping out of your cooling system. So again, a cylinder leak down test is very, very similar to a compression test, meaning we have to take off our intake, our battery, and I learned my lesson this time. I'm going to move our secondary air pump so we can take out our coil packs and spark plugs. And way faster than the first time I've done this, spark plugs are out, we're ready for our leak down test. Now when you're doing a cylinder leak down test, you need to make sure that whatever cylinder you're testing is at top dead center. When you're at top dead center, it makes sure that your valves are fully closed and you don't just let all of the air you're letting in out of the intake or exhaust valves. So the main point is to make sure that your valves are shut. I'm just gonna be using a camera to check if I'm at top dead center. Okay, so now I've verified that I am in fact at top dead center and both of my valves are shut. Now I can go ahead and thread the tester into the spark plug hole. Now before you connect your air, make sure this is all the way loose. Now I don't know if I'm doing this right, but when I turn the pressure up, so now we have 100 PSI going into the leak down tester, and this is only saying that we have 14, no, this is 12 PSI on the other side. This is supposed to be up at like 70 to 90, I believe. Well, either we already found the issue or I'm doing this wrong. No air coming out of the coolant, no air coming out of the PCV, and no air coming out of the oil dipstick. I mean, not this much of air, right? So let's try another one, see if I'm doing this wrong. So we're just gonna go right to cylinder 3. So we're gonna lower the pressure back down, disconnect our hose going to the cylinder, and move it over to cylinder 3. But first, we gotta get cylinder 3 to top dead center. Don't forget that. So there we can see that the valve is open. That's exactly why we need to be at top dead center, so that valve's not open. Okay, so now we're turning the engine over while I'm watching the camera here, and there's top dead center. I think the valves were open on cylinder 1 when I was doing the test. I'm noticing I wasn't quite at top dead center, but we're gonna test this one, and then we'll go back and test cylinder 1 again. Let's see if we can get a better result on cylinder 3 here. Okay, yeah, that's what we wanted to see. Okay, we have 0 issue with cylinder 3 here. We're at 100, and this is reading 98. That's like 0 leak down. Actually, we do have some air coming out of our intake, but again, not enough to cause any concern. So cylinder 3, definitely good. Let's go back and test cylinder 1 again. I think one of the valves was open there. Okay, cylinder 1 again, here we go. Okay, there we go. So yeah, I have to be all the way at top dead center. Apparently one of my valves was just slightly open. And look at that, we got the same result as cylinder 3 here. A few PSI difference. Cylinder 3 was at 98 PSI. Cylinder 1 is at 94 PSI. So I just did it wrong. Make sure you're all the way at top dead center. Let's move on to cylinders 2 and 4. Testing cylinder 4. Okay, there's 100 PSI, and we have the same exact result as cylinder 1 at 94 PSI. So cylinder 1, cylinder 4 are 94 PSI. Cylinder 3 all the way up at 98. Let's do cylinder 2. See what we see. All right, what did we think? Are we gonna have issues with cylinder 2? I'm kind of feeling it. I mean, this would be really nice. I'm gonna be honest. If I can see cylinder 2 is the issue, at least I have a path going forward. Okay, well, I mean, that's both good and bad news. All of them are way within spec. I mean, this one's at 96. So they're all within 5 PSI of each other, which is super, super good. And they're all super high. I mean, like this engine, I build flawless engines besides the copious amounts of coolant in the oil. So that was a little disappointing, but the cylinder leak down test confirmed that our intake and our exhaust valves are sealing properly, told me that the piston rings are sealing properly, and it told me that the head gasket is sealing properly. Okay, again, we got to remind ourselves that the problem is coolant getting into the oil, not combustion gases getting into the coolant or the oil. So while the leak down test didn't tell us anything wrong with the sealing of our cylinders, it didn't tell us whether we have an issue of sealing coolant from the oil, which is our problem. So I'm going to take the cylinder leak down test being good as good news because it means, we did something right during the rebuild. I think next up, I'm going to drain the coolant, drain the oil, see if we have any oil in the coolant. If we have coolant in the oil, but no oil in the coolant, I don't know what that'll tell us. It'll tell us something. But I think drain the coolant, drain the oil, and then let's get our turbo off and see what that looks like. Actually, one more thing before I just start digging in. I'm going to pressurize the coolant system, see if that gives me any answers as well. Okay, we're going to sit here at 13 PSI for 15 minutes. Now would be a good time to drain the oil while we let this sit here. Okay, let's take a look at our oil here. That is not supposed to be that color. I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to see the blue tint on camera, but what I can show you is just look how liquidy this is. This, I mean, like this flows like water more than it flows like oil. We have, like I said, it was only 200 miles and we have a full quart of coolant in this oil, and it just really messes with your viscosity. If I would have drove on this, if I would have not checked our oil and saw coolant in it, we would have been rebuilding the engine again. All right, so drained our oil while the pressure test was going on. So I let this sit here for 20 minutes and we dropped 1 single PSI. So we went from 13 down to 12 PSI in the coolant system. So I don't know why I did that test. We already knew there was a coolant leak. I know it's going into the oil. I know we're not burning it. Just for fun, I guess. But let's drain the coolant now. And now with our pressure tester off, I'm draining our coolant. Instead of taking the lower radiator hose off this time, I just used the drain on the actual radiator. I didn't feel like making a mess this time. Now I know I said let's take our turbo off next, but there is one more thing that's really easy to get to, even easier than the turbo, and that's the oil cooler underneath the car. Okay, so underneath the car here, and here is our oil cooler. I already took the oil filter off to drain the oil, so we should just be able to unbolt this and undo these lines. Shove this towel in there so I don't drip. Now lovely me put these hoses on before I put this on the car, so I did not face these hoses the right way, or I did not face these clamps the right way. Here's one coolant line coming off. Oh Jesus. Oh gee. Ah. Well, that was a cool shot, hopefully. You guys just got blasted, dude. Jesus Christ. You guys just took the full force of coolant from the engine straight to the camera lens. I don't know if I'm in focus or not. I'm just trying to clean my camera up. Can't tell if it's, Jesus. I didn't think there was gonna be that much coolant in there. I might have ruined my camera lens. All right, hold on guys, let me clean up. Okay, good and bad news. Good news is I probably look a little different, and it's because I'm using a different lens. The bad news is my old lens is broken. The other good news is I got our oil cooler off. Bad news is I have no clue how to test if it's bad or not, because you can't really see, I can't see any cracks on the inside. So probably a waste of time taking this off. It's brand new. I can't imagine it's got a crack from factory. And for funsies, since my camera lens was broken, I took it apart so we could take a look at it. And, you know, here's what the inside of a camera lens looks like. It's not fully disassembled, I don't think. You know, I'm sure there's a lot going on inside here. So here's the damaged lens. This is literally coolant was just pouring right onto this. It's got a lens on the front and a lens on the back. And you can see it's super foggy. So rest in peace, 20mm Tamron lens, you served me well. And now we can tack on $300 to the bill to whatever we find damaged on the car. So anyway, the cooler, I mean, we pressurized the system and we had a little leak, but all I can really think of to test this is if I cover one of the holes and just blow into it, I don't feel a leak. You know, I'm blowing as hard as I can. I don't know what PSI that is. I don't think it's broken. Finally, let's just take off our turbo. So my other camera lens was a wide angle and this one is a zoom lens. So it might look a little different. I mean, you're way farther back and you're still really zoomed in here. Camera store's closed. Can't go buy my new camera lens. We're stuck with what we got. So turbo time. Okay. Okay, got the turbo off. Didn't really show you much. You guys have seen me do all of this basically before, so I'm trying to not waste your time, trying to be really quick. I showed you all the diagnosis stuff because that's new. Now I guess we gotta take it apart and look on the inside, huh? All my tools are on my workbench, so I'm gonna work on the nice concrete floor. I'm very unorganized right now. Everything kind of took a spin when I decided to dump coolant on my camera. But we're gonna disassemble this turbo again, and I'm gonna see if I can see any cracks. All right. Yeah, came off much nicer the second time. Happy with that. So yeah, this housing is cracked. But again, exhaust gases go through it, not coolant. But that's just the exhaust housing. The thing that we need to inspect more thoroughly is our actual CHRA central housing rotational assembly. I'm gonna look this over. I'll let you know what I find. All right, boys. I looked at every single part of the turbo that I could see for a good amount of time. And unfortunately, I can't see every part of the turbo. What I can see is no cracks. I can't prove that it's the oil cooler. I can't prove that it's the turbo. I also can't really prove that it's not either of them. So I'm kind of just stuck in this state of can't prove what it isn't and I can't prove what it is. And I'm back. It's actually been 8 days since you guys last saw me. I had my baby boy Cam. So the last time you guys saw me was Saturday, and the next day, Sunday, 8:30 in the morning, we went into labor. Finally, a whole 22 hours later on Monday, Cam was born. Everything's been going great. Cam is healthy, my wife is healthy. Of course, I'm healthy too. I didn't have to go through too much besides just a little less sleep. But I'm super excited to be back working on the Subaru. So if this video is a little late, we all know why. Short little recap for me and for you. We tried to diagnose why there's coolant in the oil, and we kind of failed. We took the turbo off, we took the oil cooler off, and we checked the AOS. All of them seem to be okay. Of course, my test is pressurizing it with my lungs, you know, blocking one hole, breathing into the other, and they're not leaking. So next up, it's just time to pull the engine. But there is actually one thing I wanted to show you. The nice thing is about us taking a little 8-day vacation is that the oil in this tub here officially settled, and the coolant is on the bottom and the oil's on top. So let's see what this looks like now. I'm gonna pour this out, and hopefully oil on top, coolant on bottom. So oil, 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 and finally changes colors. There is our coolant. So I wanted to let that sit there and settle so you guys could see the difference in, you know, the dark oil. It's been 200 miles on that oil compared to the coolant that's at the bottom. So enough lollygagging, it's time to pull the engine. If you guys are here for an in-depth tutorial on how to pull the engine, how to disassemble the engine, how to rebuild the engine, how to put it back in, how to go for your first drive, check out this 3-hour full build video. I go in-depth on everything. This is just diagnosing why I have coolant in the oil. I'm not gonna go super in-depth. Now that that's out of the way, let's get to it. Pulling this engine is going to be super quick. We just need to take off our radiator, remove our fuel lines, remove our vacuum lines, take off the alternator, the AC, the power steering, and our IAG air oil separator. Then we can remove our starter and the clutch fork. I didn't forget that this time, along with our engine mount, transmission mount, the pitch stop, and finally we can take off the bell housing bolts. And with all of that done, we can put our chains on and pull our engine. We did it! Again, way quicker this time. Probably record pace, don't want to brag about it. Obviously I don't want to leave this hanging here, so we're going to take off the pressure plate and the clutch disc, remove the studs that the bell housing goes into, and then we can get it on our engine stand. Engine's out for the second time. Much easier this time. Learned a lot of lessons last time. Like, don't forget the vacuum line to the booster, don't forget the clutch pivot arm, and man, it just slides right out. Easy peasy. Another thing I forgot to mention, I was so excited to tell you guys about my new baby boy Cam. I forgot to tell you, I'm trying a new microphone setup. I probably sound different now than I did at the beginning of the video. I'm trying a microphone that doesn't clip to my shirt, it just stays on the camera. The microphone I'm trying is the microphone I see every YouTuber use. YouTubers either use an iPhone or they use a camera with the microphone I'm using. Let me know what you guys think, if you like this microphone better or the previous microphone from the beginning of the video. Next up, what we need to do is take off our intake manifold. Now the intake manifold basically takes the entire PCV vacuum line system and all of the wires. So right now I'm just going around the engine, unplugging all of the wires. I'm also going to take off the up pipe just because it'll give us a lot more room to work. And also on the back is our secondary air pump system. There's just 2 hard lines and some brackets holding on the valves. Oh, and of course we can take off the chains that we use to pull the engine as well. And with the intake off, we should be able to leave everything else on except for the timing. So timing cover off, timing belt off, and then valve cover, cams, and heads. Okay, I'm really not excited to take these bolts out. They're notorious for stripping, but here we go. Yeah, it's rounding. Oh God, it's rounding out. This is a snap-on too. Snap-on Allen key Still not good enough to take these bolts out. They came out last time, got lucky. We're gonna do an experiment here. I'm gonna see if I can remove the cam gear and the camshaft together from the engine. Don't know if it's gonna work. Might be silly, might make things harder, but let's go ahead and take our valve covers off and see if it looks like it'll work. Nope. Nope, it will not work. That was a very quick answer. In order to take the camshaft off, we have to take this off, and there's bolts underneath the plastic cover. So we're gonna have to take those cam gears off so we can take off that front timing cover. Now this might be a mistake, but I know this one's already starting to round out, so we're gonna use the big impact on it and see if it helps. That's a big impact. That's a big Milwaukee impact, and it did not even budge it. That is crazy. Which means we're gonna have to drill these out. Very, very, very not exciting. Yeah, we're 0 for 2. Let's see if the other two wanna come out. Yeah, wow. Boys, 0 for 3. We're gonna be drilling these out. Can we get one of them out? What do you think? One of them. Oh, hey. All right, we only got to drill out 3 of them. How exciting. All right, there's one. So you drill the head of the bolt off, and then you can just slide the cam gear off. All of the metal shards are super easy to clean out. It's not gonna get in your oil. They're all sitting right here on the front of the cam gear. Blow it off with the compressed air, and then you'll see your stud here, and it comes off by hand. Literally all the pressure preventing you from untightening these is just the head of the bolt against the cam gear. Again, 27/64 is the side of the drill bit that I'm using. It's slightly smaller than the diameter of the bolt. So you drill through the head of the bolt, and then I just use the hammer and a pry bar, and you break the head off the bolt. You don't want a drill bit that's bigger than the bolt, because then you're gonna drill into your cam gear. Now I got 2 more to do. Okay, I got our last one drilled out here. I just wanted to show you, like, the bolt is still holding on. I drilled through the head of it, and then I'm gonna be careful not to hit the cam gear, but just tap the head of the bolt here. And just like that, head of the bolt off. Now the cam gear slides off nicely. Don't forget to clean the metal out of the inside of the cam gear. And our 4th and final cam gear, 3 out of the 4 spun. So I don't know if that's lucky or unlucky, but they're out. All right, we are super close to taking our heads off now that our cam gears are off. We can take off this cover. And again, I didn't really want to have to do that, but in order to remove our camshafts, these 4 bolts were underneath that rear timing cover, which we couldn't get off unless we broke them off or took off the cam gears. But now we can take off our camshafts. And there we go. This is held on with RTV, so just got to pry it off. Last time I took these buckets out, I didn't really need to. I was just showing you that if you do want to take these out, if you do need to take those out, you should label them. This time I'm not going to be doing that. It's easier to just keep them in the right spot and not taking them out at all. So I think we're ready for the head bolts. Let's take them out. I'm just going to be loosening these outside in, the opposite of the torque sequence, which is inside out. And I'll just be doing them 45 degrees at a time. Okay, cylinders, what is this? This is cylinders 1 and 3. Let's see what we got. Okay, cylinder wall looks really good so far. I mean, they're halfway up, so maybe halfway down it's a little worse, but pretty good there. I mean, it's a brand new head gasket, so I don't really see a leak somewhere here. Let's take the head gasket off. Okay, well, so far, nothing glaring on cylinders 1 and 3. I don't see a crack. The cylinder walls look good. The head gasket didn't look messed up in any way, so let's flip it over and see what 2 and 4 look like. This side doesn't look too much different than the other one. Like, I'm not noticing anything crazy different. So same thing, gonna do like 45 to 90 at a time here on the head bolts, outside in. The head gasket was installed correctly. You know, we got the circle where the other circle is. I mean, it's so new. I don't know if I'd even see anything on a
head gasket with 200 miles.
All right, well, I spent a good amount of time looking over the heads and the block and all of the coolant jackets I could see. And again, I still haven't found anything. At this point, I'm pretty convinced that we're gonna have to take the case halves apart again. So let's go ahead and take off our oil pan and see if we see anything there. Good news is no metal whatsoever in the oil pan, so we haven't really done any damage to the engine. Super good to see that. And this part of the block here, you can see it goes from here all the way over to here. This has coolant running through it, and it is sealed by an O-ring. And when we look back at the footage, we can see I had the O-ring there when I put the case halves together. So this is like our final location where coolant could be getting into the oil that we haven't investigated. And I mean, looking at it, I'm not gonna really be able to see if coolant is coming out of there or not. Well, I did some cleaning and organizing of all the parts and tools because the table's back out because I'm gonna split the case halves. I really don't want to. I personally don't think the case halves splitting will solve the issue, but it would be negligent of me to come this far and not. There's one orange O-ring that seals some coolant in. I'm 95% sure it's correct, but if I came this far just to buy new head gaskets and new head bolts, put it back in, and still have the issue, honestly, no matter what I do, it's gonna suck. Let's get it over with. Let's split the case halves. So to split the case halves, we basically have to take everything off. We have engine mounts on the bottom, all of the coolant and vacuum lines on top, all of the timing gears on the front. Then we can unbolt it from the engine stand and put it on our table. Well, actually, I feel a little better now that I've committed this far. Before I took everything off of the case halves or the short block here, I was contemplating putting it back together and just taking a guess that it's the turbo. I probably will just replace the turbo at this point too, because I have that one that a subscriber gave me. We just have to unweld or grind the wastegate to open again, and then we'll use that turbo. I probably should have just started with that to see if that was the issue, but here we are, we're rebuilding the entire engine again. Luckily this time we're gonna have to do a lot less work. Anyway, let's move forward. We need to take off these back covers and the front covers so we can get the wrist pins out of our pistons, and then we can unbolt the case halves and split it apart. Again, this is not a tutorial. I'm just trying to figure out what went wrong. I went through all of this in depth in a previous video. Go check that out if you need some assistance with your build. I do see the irony in me telling you to go follow a build that I'm currently trying to figure out what went wrong with. But by the end of this, you'll know what went wrong. And hopefully after all of this, it was just my turbo. And now that all the wrist pins are out, we can split the case halves. Okay, well here we are. We're all the way down. I mean, here's the O-ring that I was concerned about. It's definitely still here and not pinched, and it was in the right spot. So unless it's just the wrong O-ring, which it fits in the circle and it sticks out past the ledge, still no smoking gun. Who knows, after all of that work, it probably could have just been the turbo. Probably should have just started with that. So after all that, let me take a peek around, let me look around. I really doubt I'm gonna find any cracks at this point, but that's why we're here. I'm gonna look around. All right, let's walk and talk. I don't see any issues. I don't see any issues with the head gasket, the oil cooler, the block, the case halves, the assembly. The only thing that was wrong with the assembly was I torqued the head down incorrectly. But from what I can see on the mating surface of the block and the head is that the head gasket was sealing correctly anyway. So what do you guys think? What do I do? At this point, it's completely disassembled. I don't see any issues. The only thing I can think of personally is just reassembling it with all new gaskets, a new oil cooler again, a new head gasket again, ARP head studs to make sure it seals it really well, and sending it. Or IAG, if you want to help a small channel out, let me know. I would love to work with you guys. On that note, I would love a discussion in the comments. Did I miss something? There's only one thing that I regret not doing, and that's pressurizing the coolant system while I had the oil pan off. I wish I would have did that. I thought about doing it. I didn't do it. I regret it. I was originally going to make this one episode of tearing it apart, finding the problem, fixing it, and sending it all in one episode. Unfortunately, it's going to take time for the parts. And honestly, I want to work on the Supra. I'm going to post this out to you guys Please let me know what you guys think. I appreciate each and every single one of you, and I'll see you in the next one.